with less energy and far more dignity of presence. The people of Aitutaki are different still, fair as the average Tahitian, and pleasing in features and manner. I have seen girls from that island who would be called beautiful in any country. These differences are not easy to account for, it seems to me, when one considers that the islanders are all of one race, tracing their ancestry back to common sources and speaking a common tongue. The trader, a friend of Riley's, took us to his house for lunch. The day was Sunday, and a feast was already preparing, so we were spared the vocal agonies of the pig. Times must be changing. I have seen very few traders of the gin-drinking type one expects to find in the South Seas. Nowadays they seem to be rather quiet, reflective men, who like to read and play their phonographs in the evening, and drink excellent whisky with soda from a sparklet bottle. This one was no exception. I found him full of intelligence and a dreamy philosophy which kept him content in this forgotten corner of the world. He was young and English. There were cricket bats and blazers in his living room, and shelves filled with the kind of books one can read over and over again. He was pessimistic over Riley's chances of getting men. The people of Mauke were drawing lazier each year, he said, and seemed to get along with less and less of the European things for which at one time they had worked. As for copra, they no longer bothered much with it. The nuts were left to sprout under the palms. The taro patches were running down, the coffee and breadfruit dropped off the trees unpicked. The oranges, which brought a good price when a vessel came to take them off, were allowed to drop and rot. As we sat smoking after lunch, a native boy came in with a vague air of conspiracy to hold a whispered conversation with Riley. When he had gone, the American turned to our host and winked at me. "There's a beer tub going full blast out in the bush," he said. "I think I'll drop in on them and see if I can pick up a man or two. You'd better come along." Liquor is prohibited to the natives throughout the Cook Islands. Even the white man must buy it from the government in quantities regulated by the judgment of the official in charge. The manufacture of anything alcoholic is forbidden, but this latter law is administered with a certain degree of tolerance. Fortunately for everyone concerned, the art of making palm toddy has never been introduced. When the Cook Islander feels the need of mild exhilaration, he takes to the bush and brews a beverage known as orange beer. The ingredients are sugar, orange juice, and yeast. The recipe would prove popular, I fancy, in our own orange-growing states. The story goes that when the Cook Island boys went overseas to war, they found a great drought prevailing in their eastern field of action. Palestine, I think it was. But there were oranges in plenty, and these untutored islanders soon showed the Tommies a trick that brought them together like brothers. I have tasted orange beer at all stages, even the rare old vintage stuff, bottled 2 or 3 months before, and found it not at all difficult to take. There are worse varieties of tipple, though this one is apt to lead to fighting, and leaves its too enthusiastic devotee with a headache of unusual severity. We found 15 or 20 men assembled under an old utu tree. A dance ended as we drew near, and the cup was being passed. 2 5-gallon kerosene tins, with the top cut off and filled with the bright yellow beer, stood in the center of the group. Women are never present on these occasions, which corresponds in a way to Saturday evenings in a club at home. A sort of rude ceremonial, a relic perhaps of kava drinking days, is observed around the beer tub. The oldest man present, armed with a heavy stick, is appointed guardian of the peace, to see that decency and order are preserved. The natives realize, no doubt, that any serious disturbance might put an end to their fun. The single cup is filled and passed to each guest in turn. He must empty it without taking breath. After every round, one of the drinkers is expected to rise and entertain the company with a dance or song. Riley was welcomed with shouts. He was in a gay mood, and when we had our turns at the cup, he stripped off his tunic for a dance. He is a famous dancer. Unhampered by the native conventions, he went through the figures of Hira, Oya, and Ura. First the man's part, then the woman's, while the men of Mauke clapped their hands rhythmically and choked with laughter. No wonder Riley gets on with the people. There is not an ounce of self-consciousness in him. He enters into a bit of fun with the good-natured abandon of a child. As for dancing, he is wonderful. Every posture was there, every twist and wiggle and flutter of the hands, what old Bligh called, with delightful, righteous gusto, the wanton gestures of the Hebrea. Riley had told his friends on the beach that he was on the lookout for labor. By this time, probably the whole island knew he was on his way to the atoll and that he needed men. Before we took leave of the drinkers, 3 of them had agreed to go with my companion. The sea was calmer now, and since Riley's wife was on the schooner, we decided to go aboard for dinner. 4 more recruits were waiting by the canoe houses to sign on. It was odd to see their response to the Irishman's casual offer when half the planters of the group declare that labor is unobtainable. The whaleboat was waiting in the passage. It was evening. The wind had dropped. The sky overhead was darkening. Out to the west the sun had set behind banks of white cloud rimmed with gold. The oarsmen took their places. Friendly hands shot us out on a lull between 2 breakers. We passed the surf and pulled offshore toward where the schooner was riding an easy swell, her lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. End of chapter 5.